Files. Files are where the software stores the data. So if you have to type a report for English class, you might use a program, an application like Word or Pages. The file is where that application stores that data. So save these files early and often because things happen. And also back your files up. Not trying to make a hit bounce record here. I'm just saying, like, have 2 copies of things. One good way to do that is use like Google Drive or Dropbox or Sync or something like that. That will keep a cloud copy and a local copy. So there are 2 basic types of files that you really need to understand for this class. And those are reference files and self-contained files. So self-contained files have all the data you need. So for instance, a PDF or an MP3 is a self-contained file. If I send you an MP3 of a song, you can take that MP3 and listen to it with only that file. Same thing, if I send you a PDF, you can open it and it looks just like a piece of paper. You can print it out, have whatever you need. Other files are reference files. So for instance, a Studio One session, the .song file, which we'll get to in greater detail later in the course, is a reference file. So when I record audio into Studio One, there's a file called whatever .song that's essentially instructions about how to play the WAV files that I've recorded. So there's going to be a separate folder called media that will have these files that the original file references. This will make more sense as we actually deal with them, but I want you to understand this idea of reference files versus self-contained files is very important. If you've ever gone to a web page and there's a picture that doesn't show up, there's just like that little image that says there's supposed to be a picture here, but it's not here. That's a reference file that's missing the file it refers to, right? So the index.html or whatever the name of the page is doesn't actually contain the images. The images are somewhere else on the server, and it just contains a link to the image that says insert that image here. But if that image is missing, if it doesn't have the reference, then you get the little missing image icon. So that's another example of a reference file. Let's talk about file names. So this paper.doc is a file name. .doc is the extension. So that tells the operating system what type of file it is. It tells it what program to open it with. And some extensions are exclusive file formats and others are interchange file formats. So anything that you see that ends in IF or IFF, that usually stands for interchange file format. So a GIF or a GIF, depending on how you pronounce that, GIF stands for graphics interchange format. AIFF is audio interchange file format. TIFF is images. I forget what the T stands for. I should know that. So those are interchange formats. Those are things that were made to be shared amongst programs. There are some exclusive file formats. PDF used to be an exclusive file format. Originally, you could only Adobe Acrobat or Acrobat Reader could deal with PDFs. That patent ran out, and so now lots of people make things that deal with PDFs. But something like a Pro Tools format, .ptx, is an exclusive file format. Only Pro Tools can use that. Same thing like the Studio One .song is only used in Studio One. So a lot of industry-specific software will have some exclusive file formats, and the interchange file formats are the things that you can pass around. So for our purposes, WAV, AIF, those sorts of audio files are interchange file formats. MP3, interestingly, was an exclusive file format in that it's owned by the Fraunhofer Institute, and they charged a royalty to use it, but they did it in a way that was interesting, that still like let the MP3 become this sort of ubiquitous format. And that's another thing we'll talk about more later in the class. Open and proprietary are similar to the exclusive and interchange, except it has more to do with business models. So MP3 was actually a proprietary file format, whereas an open file format would be something like Wave or Ogg Vorbis or FLAC, that were developed by people with the idea of letting anyone use that file format. So here's some file naming protocols and best practice. On some operating systems, uppercase and lowercase matter, so it's best to pick one and stick with it. I tend to type my file names just in all lowercase, because then I don't have to remember to hit shift. I don't mistype things. And there are occasions where it won't matter, but sometimes it does. So just pick one and stick with it. Letters, numbers, hyphen, and underscore only. Don't use slashes, don't use periods, because those things mean something in the path name. And we'll talk about that again in a second. So for this class, I want you to use the following protocol. 4 digits of the year, month, day of the date that something is due. Underscore your last name, underscore, like, the assignment if it's podcast or whatever, dot, and then the extension. So it would be MP3 or PDF or whatever the thing you're turning in is. So for instance, if I had something that was due on the day I'm making this video, which is August 19th, 2020 0819, always 2 digits for month and 2 digits for day, underscore Albert, underscore my song dot MP3 or whatever. The reason I ask you to do this is if I download all of your assignment files and put them in one directory, they automatically order themselves by due date and your last name. So it makes it easy for me to find things. I can also search for things. If I'm like, oh, I can't find Bill's assignment that was due on August 31st. I can search for 2020 0831 and find all of those assignments. So this can be helpful in your own personal computer practice as well. I actually got an email from a student once, years after she was in my class. She was an aspiring filmmaker, and she actually emailed me just to say thank you for making me use that file protocol, because now I can find stuff on my computer. So it can be helpful. The path name contains the file's location within the file system or the network, right? So when I originally made this presentation, it was in my root directory, users, Jeff. I had a Dropbox folder there. Inside the Dropbox folder was a folder called Loyola. Then was the folder for spring 2014, the folder for this course, and then this file, which I originally made in Keynote. So, right, like that's the path name. It shows you, just like in the last video where you saw all of the folders, the nested folders, that's what this is. But the reason we don't want to use slashes or periods in our file name is because they're part of the path name. So if I had called this lesson 3 / computer software, then the computer would look for a folder called L3 within the folder called M115, right? So the underscore is better. And also it's better not to have any spaces, because different operating systems deal with the spaces and file names differently. So I tend to put an underscore instead of a space, because it helps my eyes see them as separate words, but it doesn't confuse the computer. On the internet or on a network, the URL is actually exactly the same thing as a path name. So if we were looking for the MP3 called I Was Just Looking for My Pants, which was song 7 on an album called Live at Snug Harbor, which I had stored in a directory called Sounds on the server that hosts my website. That's what, see, so here's the path name on the computer, and here's the path name on the network. Internet addresses. There's an IP address or an internet protocol address. It's a number assigned to like every device on the network. So I'm at my house right now. The computer I'm using has an IP address on our local Wi-Fi network. My phone has a different IP address. My watch probably has another IP address. The iPad has an IP address. Everything that's hooked up to our network has an IP address. Those sorts of devices get assigned an IP address when you join a network. So when you walk into school and your phone gets on the Wi-Fi, it gets assigned an IP address. Certain things have static IP addresses, right? So the whole Loyola network, Loyola's place on the internet, has a static IP address. And then there's addresses within that system. So when you have a domain name for a website, it just points to that IP address. And so we call that path the URL, or Uniform Resource Locator, which would be, loyno.edu or, cmm.loyno.edu for the College of Music and Media site, etc. Okay, there you go.